I was halfway through my morning coffee when I heard the construction equipment rumbling up the mountain, and that's when I knew something was terribly wrong, because nobody should be building anything near my family's old cabin in the Adirondacks. My name is Aaron Kellerman, and I'd inherited the property from my grandfather 3 years ago. The cabin sat on 40 acres of pristine woodland near Lake Placid, New York, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that wound through dense pine forest. I'd been coming up here since I was a kid, and the isolation was exactly what I needed after my divorce. The property had been in my family since 1952, passed down through 3 generations, and I'd always assumed it would stay exactly as it was until I was old enough to pass it on myself. But that Tuesday morning in early June, the sound of diesel engines shattered the peaceful silence I'd grown to love. I pulled on my boots and headed outside, following the noise. What I found made my blood run cold. A bobcat excavator was tearing up the ground near the northwest corner of my cabin, carving a path through the forest floor. 2 men in orange safety vests were marking trees with spray paint, and a woman in khaki shorts and a polo shirt was directing them with aggressive hand gestures. Behind them, I could see they'd already cleared a trail stretching back into the woods, raw earth exposed like an open wound through the landscape. "Hey!" I shouted, jogging toward them. "What the hell are you doing on my property?" The woman turned, clipboard in hand, and gave me a look that could freeze lava. She was probably in her mid-50s, with severely short blonde hair and the kind of pinched expression that suggested she'd been disapproving of things for decades. "Excuse me? This is HOA land. We're installing the new community nature trail as approved by the board." "HOA? What HOA? This is private property, my property." She sighed like I was a particularly slow child. "The Mountain View Estates Homeowners Association. All properties within our boundaries are subject to our covenants and bylaws. The trail was approved 3 months ago at our annual meeting." She consulted her clipboard. "You must be the new resident at Lot 47. You should have received notification." "Lot 47? Lady, I don't know what you're talking about. This cabin has been in my family for 70 years. There's no HOA, and you need to stop what you're doing right now." Her eyes narrowed. "I'm Barbara Sutherland, president of the Mountain View Estates HOA, and I can assure you that every property within our development is bound by our regulations. If you didn't receive the notice, that's unfortunate, but it doesn't change the fact that this trail construction is perfectly legal and approved." I felt my jaw clench. "Show me the paperwork. Show me anything that says you have the right to bulldoze my land." Barbara's smile was thin and cold. "I don't need to show you anything. The documents are on file with the county. If you have questions, you can attend our next board meeting. But this trail is going through, whether you like it or not. We've already invested $15,000 in the project. Then you better have $15,000 to pay for the damages when I sue you." She actually laughed. "Sue away, Mr. Kellerman. You'll find that HOA covenants are legally binding. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do." I stood there, fists clenched, as she turned her back on me and waved the excavator forward. The machine lurched closer to my cabin, its bucket scraping away decades of soil and vegetation. I noticed for the first time that their trail path was going to cut within 6 feet of my foundation. "Stop!" I yelled, but the operator couldn't hear me over the engine noise. I ran directly in front of the bobcat, forcing him to halt. He killed the engine and pulled off his ear protection. "What's the problem?" "The problem is you're destroying my property. All of you need to leave, now." Barbara stormed over, her face flushed red. "If you interfere with HOA business, I'll call the police and have you removed. Call them, please. I'd love to explain to law enforcement how you're trespassing and destroying private property." For the first time, Barbara looked uncertain. She pulled out her phone and stepped away, speaking in low, urgent tones. I took the opportunity to photograph everything: the excavator, the damaged ground, the spray-painted trees, the workers. I got license plates and close-ups of the equipment rental company names. 10 minutes later, a sheriff's deputy pulled up in his cruiser. He was young, maybe late 20s, with a weary expression that suggested he'd dealt with property disputes before. "Deputy Morrison," he introduced himself, shaking my hand. "Want to tell me what's going on?" I explained the situation while Barbara hovered nearby, occasionally interjecting with comments about HOA authority and legal precedents. The deputy listened patiently, taking notes. "Do you have documentation showing ownership?" he asked me. "Inside. Give me 2 minutes." I ran back to the cabin and grabbed the folder I kept in the fireproof safe. Inside were the deed, title insurance, property survey, and tax records. My hands were shaking slightly as I brought them outside, suddenly worried that somehow, impossibly, I might be wrong. Deputy Morrison examined each document carefully. His expression grew more serious as he read. "Ms. Sutherland, do you have documentation showing HOA authority over this property?" Barbara's confident demeanor faltered. "It's all filed with the county. This entire area was designated as Mountain View Estates when the development was established in 2019. 2019? I interrupted. "My family has owned this land since 1952. Look at the deed. It's all there." The deputy nodded slowly. "Mr. Kellerman's documentation appears to be in order. This property predates your HOA by almost 70 years. Unless you can provide proof that this specific parcel was legally incorporated into your association, I'm going to have to ask you to cease work immediately." Barbara's face went from red to purple. "This is absurd. We have maps showing all HOA properties. This cabin is clearly within our boundaries." "Maps can be wrong, madam. Property law is based on deeds and legal descriptions, not sketches on a planning document. I suggest you contact your HOA attorney and get this sorted out. Until then, no more work on this site." "But we've already committed resources. Madam, if you continue, Mr. Kellerman has grounds to press charges for property damage and trespassing. I strongly recommend you pack up and leave while we figure this out properly." Barbara looked like she wanted to argue more, but something in the deputy's tone made her reconsider. She snapped at her workers to stop, made a big show of taking photographs of her own, and then stalked off to her Mercedes SUV without another word to me. The workers loaded up their equipment with the efficiency of people who knew when to cut their losses. After they left, Deputy Morrison and I stood in the torn-up ground they'd left behind. "You should document all this damage," he said. "Photos, measurements, everything. If this goes to court, you'll want a thorough record." "It's going to court?" He shrugged. "Hard to say. Sometimes HOAs back down when they realize they've made a mistake. Sometimes they double down. People get weird about property lines and authority. I just want to be left alone. I understand, but you should probably get a lawyer anyway, just to be safe." He gave me his card and left, and I spent the next hour photographing and measuring the destruction. They'd torn up nearly 200 feet of forest, destroyed the root systems of a dozen mature trees, and carved a muddy scar that would take years to heal naturally. Worst of all, their excavation had come within 5 feet of my cabin's foundation, close enough that I could see exposed stonework where the soil had been scraped away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Barbara's face, the absolute certainty in her eyes that she had authority over my land. How could an HOA claim property that had been in my family for decades? I pulled out all the documents again, reading through them by lamplight. The original deed was from 1952, signed by a man named Walter Pritchard, who'd sold 40 acres to my grandfather, James Kellerman, for $8,000. The legal description was precise, using survey markers and compass bearings to define exact boundaries. There was no mention of any development, no restrictions beyond basic zoning, no HOA covenants. It was clean, clear ownership. But Barbara had seemed so certain. Either she was deliberately lying, or someone had made a serious mistake in the HOA's records. I needed to find out which. The next morning, I drove into Lake Placid and went straight to the county clerk's office. The woman behind the counter was helpful, pulling up property records on her computer. "Let me see what I can find about this Mountain View Estates," she said, typing. "Okay, here we go. The HOA was established in 2019 by a developer named Preston Holdings. They purchased a large tract of land and subdivided it into 52 lots, with common areas and shared amenities. The covenants were filed in March of that year." "Can you show me the map of their properties?" She pulled up a digital file and turned the monitor so I could see. The Mountain View Estates development was indeed large, covering several hundred acres. The lots were color-coded, with green areas showing common spaces and the individual parcels numbered. And there, right in the middle of the map, was my cabin marked as Lot 47. "That's wrong," I said. "My property isn't part of their development." The clerk zoomed in, frowning. "That's strange. Let me check the deed records." She typed for several minutes, pulling up different files. "Okay, so according to this, Lot 47 is listed as part of the Preston Holdings subdivision, but when I look at the actual deed history for those coordinates—" She trailed off, her frown deepening. "This doesn't make sense. The deed history shows continuous ownership by the Kellerman family since 1952. It was never sold to Preston Holdings." So someone made a mistake when they drew up the HOA boundaries. A pretty significant mistake. Yes. It looks like whoever created the subdivision map simply assumed all the land in this area was part of their purchase, but your property was a separate parcel surrounded by the larger tract Preston bought. It's what we call an in-holding. "Can you print this out for me? All of it?" She printed everything: the deed history, the conflicting maps, the HOA covenants, and a letter on official county stationery explaining that my property was not, in fact, part of Mountain View Estates. I walked out of there feeling vindicated but also anxious. Barbara hadn't struck me as the type to admit she was wrong. I was proven right that same afternoon when I found a letter taped to my front door. It was printed on HOA letterhead and signed by Barbara in aggressive blue ink. "Dear Mr. Kellerman," it read, "this letter serves as official notice that you are in violation of Mountain View Estates HOA Covenant Section 12, subsection D, which prohibits interference with approved common area improvements. You are hereby fined $500 and ordered to cease all interference with the Nature Trail project. Additionally, your property has been cited for the following violations: unapproved roof color, lack of required landscaping plan approval, and failure to submit architectural modification requests for recent repairs. Each violation carries a $250 fine. Total amount due, $1,750. Payment is due within 30 days. Failure to pay will result in a lien being placed on your property." I read it twice, my anger building with each word. They were actually fining me. After trespassing on my land, destroying my property, and being told by law enforcement to cease work, they had the audacity to fine me. I called the number at the bottom of the letter. A recorded voice informed me that the Mountain View Estates HOA office was open Monday through Thursday, 9 to 4. I left a message explaining exactly what I thought of their fines and suggested they have their lawyer call me. Then I did what I should have done immediately and called a property attorney. His name was David Fisher, and he came highly recommended by Deputy Morrison. I scanned and emailed him all my documents, including the threatening letter from the HOA. He called me back within 2 hours. "Mr. Kellerman, this is a fairly straightforward case from what I can see. Your property clearly predates the HOA and was never legally incorporated into their association. They have no authority over you whatsoever. So what do I do about their fines and threats?" "Ignore them. They're not enforceable. However, you should sue them for the property damage. From your photos, I'd estimate between $5,000 and $8,000 in restoration costs. We should also seek an injunction preventing them from coming onto your land again." "How much is this going to cost me?" "I can file the paperwork for a $1,500 retainer. If it goes to trial, obviously more, but I suspect they'll settle once they understand their position." I authorized him to proceed. That night, I felt better knowing I had legal representation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. I was right. 3 days later, I woke to find construction equipment back on my property. Not the same crew as before. These were different people, and they'd started work at dawn before I was even awake. By the time I got outside, they'd already extended the trail another 30 feet, bringing it right up against my cabin's foundation. I was so angry I could barely form words. I called 911, reported trespassing and property destruction, and then called David Fisher. While waiting for the sheriff, I confronted the workers. "Who authorized you to be here?" The foreman, a heavy-set man with a thick beard, shrugged. "HOA hired us. We go where we're told." "This is private property. You're trespassing. Take it up with the HOA, buddy. I just work here." "The sheriff is on his way. You might want to pack up." He looked uncertain but didn't move. We stood in awkward silence until Deputy Morrison arrived, this time with a partner. He looked annoyed when he saw the situation. "Ms. Sutherland again?" he asked me. Different crew, same problem." Morrison walked over to the foreman and had a brief conversation. I saw the foreman make a phone call, presumably to Barbara or whoever had hired him. After a few minutes, Morrison came back to me. "They're claiming they have written authorization from the property owner. They say someone named Preston Holdings gave them permission. Preston Holdings doesn't own this land. I do. You saw my deed." "I know. I'm just telling you what they're saying." He turned back to the workers. "Gentlemen, I'm going to need you to cease work and leave the property. The ownership is in dispute, and until it's resolved legally, you can't be here." The foreman wasn't happy, but he complied. As the equipment was being loaded, a black BMW pulled up, and a man in an expensive suit got out. He was probably 60, with silver hair and the kind of tan that came from golf courses and yacht clubs. "I'm Richard Preston," he announced, striding toward us like he owned the place. Which, in his mind, he probably thought he did. "And I want to know who's interfering with my development project." "Your development project?" I said. "This is my land?" "This entire area is Mountain View Estates. I bought it in 2018 and established the HOA. Every square foot belongs to the association. Except my 40 acres that your surveyor apparently missed when drawing up your pretty maps." Richard's expression shifted from confident to calculating. "Let me see your deed. Let me see yours." We stared at each other for a long moment. Deputy Morrison stepped between us. "Gentlemen, this isn't accomplishing anything. Mr. Kellerman, you don't have to show him anything. Mr. Preston, if you believe you have legitimate claim to this property, take it up in court. Until then, no more work happens here. Am I clear?" Richard pulled out his phone and made a call, walking away for privacy. When he came back, his expression had changed again, more uncertain now. "There may have been a mapping error," he admitted, "but we've invested significant resources in this trail project. The community is expecting it. Perhaps we can reach an accommodation." "An accommodation? You destroyed my property." "I'm prepared to offer compensation for any damage, and we can reroute the trail to minimize impact on your immediate cabin area. But the trail needs to go through. We've already sold lots to homeowners with the promise of this amenity." "That sounds like your problem, not mine." Richard's jaw tightened. "Don't be unreasonable. We can make this worth your while. $20,000 to grant us an easement for the trail." It was a lot of money. For a moment, I actually considered it. But then I looked at the torn earth, the exposed foundation, the casual arrogance in Richard's eyes that said he expected everyone to have a price. "No deal. Get off my land." His expression went cold. "You're making a mistake. The HOA has lawyers on retainer. We can drag this out for years, cost you tens of thousands in legal fees. Is your pride really worth that? Is your trail?" He stared at me for another moment, then turned and walked back to his BMW without another word. As he drove away, Deputy Morrison let out a low whistle. "You just made an enemy." "He made himself my enemy when he trespassed on my property." "Fair point, but Preston Holdings is a big company around here. They've developed half the lakefront properties in the county. They don't like losing. Neither do I." Over the next week, things escalated rapidly. David Fisher filed our lawsuit seeking damages and an injunction. The HOA responded with their own lawsuit, claiming I was in violation of covenants and seeking to force me to grant the trail easement. They also placed a lien on my property for unpaid fines, which was completely unenforceable but created a cloud on my title. Barbara started showing up at my property every few days, taking photographs and making notes on her clipboard. She never spoke to me, just documented everything with the meticulous attention of someone building a case. I started doing the same, photographing her trespassing, recording the times and dates of her visits. Then, the HOA filed a formal complaint with the county, claiming my cabin was a safety hazard that violated building codes. Apparently, because it was built in 1952, it didn't meet modern standards for electrical systems, septic capacity, or structural requirements. They demanded the county inspect it and potentially condemn it. The county inspector who showed up was apologetic but thorough. He spent 3 hours going through every inch of the cabin, testing outlets, checking the roof structure, examining the foundation. "Bah." "Look," he said finally, The cabin is old, and it doesn't meet current code for new construction, but it's grandfathered in. As long as you maintain it properly and don't do major renovations that would trigger current code requirements, you're fine. Someone's wasting everyone's time with this complaint. Can you put that in writing? Already did. I'll send a copy to whoever filed the complaint and let them know they're barking up the wrong tree. But the harassment didn't stop. I started getting letters from the HOA about noise violations, even though I lived alone and barely made any sound, about light pollution from my porch lamp, about my truck being an unapproved vehicle color. Each letter came with fines and threats. David advised me to keep every letter, document every incident, and not engage. They're trying to provoke you into doing something that will hurt your case. Don't give them ammunition. It was good advice, but hard to follow. Every time I saw Barbara's Mercedes or one of Richard Preston's construction vehicles prowling around my property line, my blood pressure spiked. I felt under siege in the place I'd come to find peace. The preliminary hearing for our lawsuits was scheduled for late July. David was confident we'd win the injunction, but he warned me that property disputes could drag on forever if the other side was determined enough. Preston Holdings has deep pockets, he explained. They can afford to keep this in court for years if they want. Most people eventually settle just to end the stress and expense. I'm not most people. I'm getting that impression. But you need to be realistic about the costs, both financial and emotional. Is this really the hill you want to die on? I thought about my grandfather, who'd worked 2 jobs to save up the money to buy this land. About the summers I'd spent here as a kid, learning to fish and hike and appreciate the quiet beauty of the mountains. About the peace I'd found here after my divorce, the sense of continuity and belonging that came from being somewhere your family had roots. Yes, I said, this is exactly the hill. The hearing was held in the Essex County Courthouse in Elizabethtown. David and I arrived early and set up at our table with organized folders of evidence. The HOA's legal team was more impressive, 3 attorneys in expensive suits, plus Barbara and Richard Preston sitting behind them. The judge was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Margaret Chen. She'd been on the bench for 20 years and had a reputation for cutting through nonsense to get at the facts. Both sides presented their cases. David kept it simple, showing my family's deed history, the county clerk's confirmation that my property was never part of Preston Holdings' purchase, and photos of the damage the HOA had caused. The HOA's lead attorney, a man named Gerald Whitmore, argued that my property had been inadvertently incorporated into their development and that I should be required to conform to HOA standards for the good of the community. Judge Chen listened patiently, asking occasional pointed questions. When both sides had finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Let me make sure I understand the HOA's position," she said. "You're arguing that Mr. Kellerman's property, which has been in his family since 1952 and was never sold to your client, should somehow be bound by covenants established in 2019? Whitmore shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, the property is surrounded by HOA land. It creates an in-holding situation that affects the entire community. We believe that under principles of equity. Counselor, property law doesn't work on principles of, it would be nice if this land was ours too. Either the land was legally incorporated into your HOA or it wasn't. From the evidence presented, it clearly was not. Your Honor, we've invested substantial resources based on maps that showed maps that were wrong. That's not Mr. Kellerman's problem. It's yours." She looked at David. "I'm granting your motion for a preliminary injunction. The HOA is ordered to stay off Mr. Kellerman's property pending final resolution of this matter. Any further trespassing will be considered contempt of court." She turned to Whitmore. "As for your counterclaim seeking to force an easement, that's denied. If your client wants an easement, they need to negotiate in good faith, not bulldoze first and ask questions later." Barbara made a sound of protest from the gallery. Judge Chen's eyes fixed on her. "Do you have something to add, madam?" Barbara stood up, ignoring frantic whispers from her attorneys. "Your Honor, this man is disrupting an entire community. The trail was approved by our board, and residents are expecting it. He's being selfish and unreasonable." "Ms. Sutherland, is it? Let me explain something about property rights. They're not subject to a vote. Mr. Kellerman owns his land, and he gets to decide what happens on it. If your HOA made promises to residents without securing the necessary property rights first, that's a failure of due diligence on your part. But we have bylaws that don't apply to people who never agreed to them. Sit down, please. Barbara sat, her face bright red. Judge Chen made some final notes. I'm also ordering mediation between the parties to resolve the property damage claim. Mr. Fisher, file your damages assessment within 2 weeks. We'll reconvene in 60 days to review progress. Court adjourned. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt like I could breathe properly for the first time in weeks. David was grinning. That went about as well as it could have. Chen's injunction has teeth. If they violate it, they'll be in serious trouble. You think they'll actually stay away? They'd be idiots not to. But we'll see. For a week, there was peace. No construction equipment, no Barbara prowling around with her clipboard, no threatening letters. I started to hope that maybe, finally, this was over. Then I came home from a supply run in town to find that someone had dumped a truckload of rocks across my driveway, completely blocking access to the cabin. They were big rocks, too, landscaping boulders that would require heavy equipment to move. I called David immediately. He called the sheriff's office. Deputy Morrison came out with a detective this time, a woman named Sarah Palmer, who took the incident much more seriously than a simple property dispute. This is criminal mischief, she said, photographing the blocked driveway. Possibly harassment. Do you have any idea who might have done this? The HOA has been harassing me for weeks. We just got back from court where a judge ruled in my favor. This seems like retaliation. Do you have any proof it was them specifically? I didn't. The rocks could have been dumped any time while I was gone. There were no witnesses, no security cameras. Detective Palmer took a report but warned me that without evidence linking it to specific individuals, there wasn't much they could do. I spent the next day hiring an excavator to clear my driveway, which cost me $800 I shouldn't have had to spend. I also installed 3 security cameras with motion detection around the property. If someone came back, I'd have them on video. The cameras caught plenty. Not more vandalism, but constant surveillance. Cars would drive slowly past my property, stopping to take photos. People would walk the property line, always staying just barely on the HOA side, pointing and talking. Barbara drove by at least twice a day. It was creepy and clearly intentional, designed to make me feel watched and unwelcome. The mediation session was a disaster. The mediator, a retired judge named Harold Banks, tried his best to find common ground, but the HOA refused to accept any responsibility for the damage they'd caused. We were operating under good faith belief that the land was ours, Whitmore argued. Any damage was unintentional and minimal. Minimal, I said. You tore up 200 feet of forest, came within 5 feet of my foundation, and destroyed mature trees. I've got quotes for restoration work ranging from $7,000 to $9,000. Richard Preston leaned forward. I'll offer $3,000 and the original easement deal, $20,000 for the trail right-of-way. Final offer. No deal, and I want full restoration costs plus compensation for my time and stress. Be reasonable, Mr. Kellerman. You'll never get a better offer than this. Then we'll let a jury decide. The mediation ended with nothing resolved. David warned me that we were heading for a full trial, which could take a year or more to actually happen. The good news is we have a strong case, he said. The bad news is it's going to be expensive and time-consuming. Are you sure you want to keep fighting? I was tired. Tired of the constant stress, the harassment, the feeling of being under siege. My peaceful mountain retreat had become a battleground. Part of me wanted to just take their money and let them have the damn trail. But every time I considered giving in, I thought about the principle involved. If the HOA could bully me into surrendering my rights, what would they do to the next person? And the next? Property rights meant something. My family's history on this land meant something. I'm sure, I told David. We fight. That night, I was sitting on my porch when headlights turned up my driveway. I tensed, hand moving toward my phone to call 911, but then I recognized Deputy Morrison's cruiser. He got out, looking grim. Mr. Kellerman, we need to talk. What's wrong? Did you make any threats against Barbara Sutherland or Richard Preston? What? No. Why? They filed a police report claiming you've been harassing them, threatening phone calls, driving by their homes, following Ms. Sutherland around town. I stared at him in disbelief. That's completely false. I've been here trying to avoid them. Check my phone records, my truck's GPS. I haven't been anywhere near their homes. I don't even know where they live. Morrison nodded slowly. That's what I figured. Your truck has been parked here every time I've driven by, and you don't strike me as the harassing type, but I had to follow up on the report. This is retaliation for the court case, isn't it? Probably. But here's the thing. False police reports are a crime themselves. If they're lying, they could be charged. But I need proof. What kind of proof? Anything that establishes where you were when they claim you were harassing them. Phone location data, witnesses, receipts from stores, whatever you can provide. I spent the next hour going through my records with Morrison, establishing a timeline that definitively proved I couldn't have done what they claimed. The deputy took copies of everything. This should clear you, he said, and I'm going to have a word with Miss Sutherland about making false accusations. That's not something we take lightly. After he left, I sat on my porch in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the forest. This had gone far beyond a property dispute. The HOA was actively trying to intimidate me, frame me, destroy my reputation. The realization was chilling. I called David first thing in the morning and told him about the false police report. That's actually good news for our case, he said. It establishes a pattern of harassment and bad faith on their part. We can use this. How? We amend our lawsuit to include claims for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and potentially fraud. If we can show they've been systematically trying to force you off your land through illegal means, a jury will hammer them. What about criminal charges for the false report? That's up to the DA's office, not us, but we can certainly make sure they're aware of it. The amended complaint was filed 2 weeks later. It detailed every incident of harassment, every threatening letter, every act of trespassing and vandalism, and the false police report. We asked for actual damages, punitive damages, and attorney's fees. The total amount sought was $75,000. The HOA's response was swift and vicious. They filed a motion to dismiss, claiming our lawsuit was frivolous. They sent letters to my neighbors, the few other property owners in the area who weren't part of their development, warning them that I was a troublemaker who would drag down everyone's property values. They posted about me on the Mountain View Estates community Facebook group, painting me as an unreasonable hermit who was standing in the way of community progress. One of my actual neighbors, an elderly man named Frank who lived 2 miles down the mountain, called me after seeing the Facebook posts. Aaron, I've known your family for 40 years. These HOA people are full of it. If you need someone to testify about your character or the history of your property, I'm happy to help. Thanks, Frank. That means a lot. They tried to get me to join their HOA too, Claimed my property was part of their development. I told them to pound sand. My land has been in my family even longer than yours, since 1947. Did they back off? Eventually. But they weren't happy about it. These developer types think they own the whole mountain. Frank's call reminded me that I wasn't alone in this fight. There were other people who valued property rights and tradition over the sanitized, controlled communities the HOA represented. Discovery in the lawsuit revealed some interesting information. David's subpoenas turned up internal HOA emails that were remarkably damning. In one exchange, Barbara had written to Richard Preston, "The Kellerman property is right in the middle of our best trail route. We need to find a way to get him out of there. Can we claim abandonment, code violations, whatever it takes?" Richard's response, "Be careful about creating a paper trail. Just proceed with construction and deal with objections as they come. Most people cave when they realize how expensive fighting is." In another email, after the first court hearing, Barbara had written, "This judge is obviously biased. We need to make Kellerman so miserable he gives up. I'll coordinate with the board to increase pressure." David was delighted when he showed me the emails. "This is gold. They're admitting to a conspiracy to force you off your land through harassment. The jury is going to eat this up. Can we use this to get the case moved up? I'm tired of waiting. I'll file a motion for expedited trial based on ongoing harassment. The emails should help make that case." Judge Chen agreed to move our trial date up to November, which was still months away but better than the original schedule. In the meantime, the harassment continued, though more subtly now that they knew we were documenting everything. The HOA started filing noise complaints with the county whenever I ran my generator or used power tools. They claimed I was operating an illegal business from my cabin, which required a code enforcement officer to come investigate. They sent certified letters demanding payment of fines that now totaled over $8,000, threatening to foreclose on the liens they'd illegally placed. Each incident was annoying, but also helpful to our case. The pattern of harassment became impossible to deny. Even Judge Chen commented on it during a status conference, warning the HOA's attorneys that their clients' behavior was not helping their position. Then, in late September, things took a darker turn. I woke at 3 a.m. to the smell of smoke. For a terrifying moment, I thought the cabin was on fire. I bolted outside in my boxer shorts and bare feet to find flames in the woods about 50 yards from my property, right on the HOA side of the boundary line. I called 911 immediately. The volunteer fire department responded quickly, and they managed to contain the blaze before it spread too far. But it had been close. If the wind had been blowing differently, my cabin could have been in serious danger. The fire marshal who investigated the next day didn't think it was accidental. Point of origin appears to be a pile of brush and deadfall that was deliberately stacked, he said. And there's an accelerant pattern. Someone set this fire. The HOA has been harassing me for months. Could this be related? That's for the police to investigate. But I'll note in my report that the fire was deliberately set and in suspicious proximity to an ongoing property dispute. Detective Palmer took over the arson investigation. She interviewed me extensively about my conflict with the HOA, took copies of all the threatening letters and emails, and assured me she was taking this seriously. Arson is a felony, she said. If someone from the HOA did this, they're looking at prison time. The investigation took weeks. Security footage from a nearby property owner caught a vehicle matching Barbara's Mercedes driving slowly past the area around 2:30 in the morning, about 30 minutes before the fire started. It wasn't conclusive proof, but it was suspicious as hell. Then Detective Palmer got a break. One of the workers who'd been on the original trail construction crew came forward. He'd been troubled by how aggressive the HOA had become and decided to talk. "Barbara Sutherland paid me $2,000 cash to dump those rocks in your driveway," he told the detective. "She said it was just a prank, nothing serious. But when I heard about the fire, I got worried this was getting out of hand." With his testimony and the vehicle identification, Detective Palmer had enough to bring Barbara in for questioning. I wasn't present, but David got a copy of the interview transcript through Discovery. Barbara initially denied everything, but when confronted with the evidence, her story started falling apart. She admitted to dumping the rocks, but claimed it was just sending a message. She denied starting the fire, but couldn't explain what she was doing driving around at 2:30 in the morning near my property. The fire investigator found additional evidence, accelerant residue on a gas can in Barbara's garage that matched the accelerant used at the fire scene. That was enough for the DA to file charges. Barbara Sutherland was arrested on October 12th and charged with second-degree arson, criminal mischief, and harassment. Her mugshot made the local news. The president of the Mountain View Estates HOA, looking haggard and furious, being led away in handcuffs. Richard Preston immediately distanced himself and the HOA from Barbara's actions. Through his attorneys, he claimed she'd been acting independently and had exceeded her authority. The HOA board voted to remove her as president and suspended all legal action against me. David advised me not to accept any settlement offers until after Barbara's criminal case was resolved. Her prosecution strengthens our position dramatically. The HOA is going to want this to go away quietly. He was right. 2 weeks before our civil trial was scheduled to begin, Richard Preston's attorney called with a serious settlement offer: $70,000 in damages, full restoration of my property to its original condition, a permanent injunction preventing the HOA from entering my land or claiming any authority over it, and a written apology to be published in the local newspaper. I wanted to reject it on principle and take them to trial, but David talked sense into me. "Aaron, this is a complete victory. They're giving you everything you asked for plus more. Yes, a jury might award you even more in punitive damages, but trials are unpredictable. This is a sure thing. What about holding them accountable? Barbara's being held accountable criminally. Preston is being held accountable financially. Take the win. I thought about it for 2 days before agreeing. The settlement was signed in early November. The next week, a restoration crew began carefully repairing the damage to my forest, replanting trees, and restoring the soil. The HOA paid for everything, including my attorney's fees. Barbara's trial happened in January. I attended, sitting in the back of the courtroom as prosecutors laid out their case. The evidence was overwhelming. The accelerant match, her vehicle near the scene, the testimony from the worker she'd paid to harass me, the emails showing her campaign to force me off my land. Her attorney tried to argue that she'd gotten carried away defending what she believed was HOA property, that the fire had been meant only to scare me, not actually hurt anyone. The jury didn't buy it. They convicted her on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison, with possibility of parole after 18 months. He was particularly harsh in his sentencing statement. Ms. Sutherland, you abused a position of community trust to wage a campaign of harassment and intimidation against a man whose only crime was owning property you wanted. When that didn't work, you escalated to arson, putting not just Mr. Kellerman, but the entire surrounding forest at risk. Your actions were premeditated, malicious, and completely inexcusable. The sentence of this court is intended to send a clear message that property disputes must be resolved through legal channels, not through harassment and violence. Barbara was led away in tears. I felt no satisfaction watching her go, just a tired sense of closure. Richard Preston approached me in the courthouse hallway afterward. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about how this all went down, he said. Barbara got out of control. I should have stopped her earlier. You were part of it, I said. Those emails showed you knew exactly what was happening. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I got caught up in the business side of things, forgot there were real people and real stakes involved. That's not an excuse, just an explanation. Just stay away from my property. That's all I ask. You have my word. The trail got rerouted anyway. Turns out there was a better path that avoided your land completely. We should have looked harder for alternatives from the beginning. He walked away, and I never saw him again. The Mountain View Estates development continued, and I heard they eventually completed their trail system using the alternative route. The new HOA president sent me a formal letter apologizing for Barbara's actions and confirming that my property was recognized as independent of their association. Life slowly returned to normal at the cabin. The restored areas would take years to look natural again, but at least the scarring was being healed. I upgraded my security system and kept the cameras running, but after a few months of peace, I started to relax again. Frank stopped by in early spring with a 6-pack of beer and sat on my porch while we watched the sunset. Heard you finally got everything settled, he said. More or less. Still have nightmares sometimes about waking up to smoke. I bet. That Barbara woman always struck me as unhinged. Some people get a little taste of authority and lose their minds. Yeah. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening birds. Your grandfather would be proud, you know, Frank said eventually. He fought hard to keep this land. Would have hated to see you bullied off it. That's what kept me going. This place means something. It's not just real estate. Damn right it's not. The settlement money helped me make some improvements to the cabin. A new roof, updated wiring, a more efficient heating system. I kept the original character of the place, but made it more livable for year-round use. I was thinking about retiring up here permanently when the time came. One afternoon in June, almost exactly a year after this whole mess started, I was working in my garden when a car pulled up. I tensed, old reflexes kicking in, but it was just a young couple looking lost. Sorry to bother you, the man said. We're looking at buying one of the lots in Mountain View Estates and got turned around. Can you point us back to the main development? I gave them directions and they thanked me and started to leave. Then the woman turned back. Can I ask you something? We heard there was some kind of big legal fight between the HOA and a property owner around here. Do you know anything about that? We're trying to figure out if this HOA is going to be a nightmare or not. I considered my answer carefully. The HOA had a bad president who broke some laws and went to prison for it. They've replaced her and apparently straightened out their act, but my advice: read every page of those HOA covenants before you buy. Understand exactly what authority you're giving them over your property. And if something doesn't feel right, walk away. There are plenty of other places to live. The couple looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them. "Thanks for the honest advice," the man said. They drove off and I went back to my garden. Maybe they'd buy in Mountain View Estates anyway, or maybe my words would make them think twice. Either way, I'd done what I could. That evening, I pulled out the original deed again, the one from 1952. My grandfather's signature was still bold and clear at the bottom, his faith in the American system of property rights, preserved in ink and legal language. He'd trusted that owning land meant something, that it came with protections and rights that couldn't be voted away or bulldozed over by people who wanted something you had. He'd been right, but defending those rights had required fight, money, and more stress than I'd ever imagined. The system worked, but only because I'd been willing and able to navigate it. Not everyone would have the resources or stubborn determination to do what I'd done. I thought about adding my own note to the deed documents, something for whoever inherited this property next. A warning that land ownership meant eternal vigilance, that there would always be people who thought their plans were more important than your rights. In the end, I decided to let my story speak for itself. If my kids or grandkids ever ended up with this cabin, they'd hear the tale of the year I fought the HOA and won. For now, I had my peace back. The mountains were quiet except for wind in the pines and the occasional call of a loon from the lake. My 40 acres remained mine, free and clear, with papers documenting an unbroken chain of ownership stretching back 74 years. I sat on my porch as darkness fell, the same porch my grandfather had built with his own hands, and felt the satisfaction of a battle won and a principle defended. The cabin would stand for another 70 years if I had anything to say about it, a testament to the idea that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible and the enemy seems unbeatable. The HOA had learned an expensive lesson about property rights and the dangers of assuming authority they didn't actually have. Barbara Sutherland was learning even harder lessons in a minimum security prison upstate. Richard Preston's company was presumably being more careful about verifying property boundaries before bulldozing through them. And I was back to enjoying the solitude and beauty that had drawn my grandfather to this mountain in the first place. Some victories are worth whatever they cost to achieve. This was one of them. My land, my rights, my home. No HOA, no community board, no developer with big plans and bigger lawyers could take that away. Not without one hell of a fight. And I'd proven I was more than willing to give them exactly that.